Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to a new edition of MCO at Home Series 2. And as promised, we get more interesting personalities and guests over at our show. And today, we have someone very special, all the way from Berlin, Germany, Mr. Volker Friedrich. Good afternoon, Volker. And good
Yes,
evening,
hello.
ladies and gentlemen. Right, what time is it over there in Berlin?
Yeah, we are just past lunchtime. It's 2 o'clock here. Good evening to Malaysia, and hello to all my friends in Malaysia.
Right. You told me once that you feel more Malaysian. Perhaps you can give us a background about, your relationship and your love affair with Malaysia, being a German.
That's true. I mean, I came to Malaysia for travel in the late 90s, and I started my company in 1997. So for more than 20 years now, we are Sendirian Berhad with a focus of consulting and partnering with German investors, German traders, German distributors. And I never thought that I spent, I would say, a quarter of my lifetime, so to say, I mean, hypothetically, in and with Malaysia. But it happens that I made many, many friends. I love the country, the people, the weather, the food. So everything is just nice in Malaysia. And I have the privilege, really, to split my year between Malaysia and Germany.
Right.
And,
so what is the name of your outfit?
My company name is called GBP International, and it is derived from the old original name when we were called German Business Pool. But not to everybody, Germany sounds so attractive. So I decided after 3-4 years, we abbreviate it and we call it GBP International. And with a little twist in tongue, I say GBP now stands for Great Business Partners. But that is the original history of the abbreviation GBP.
I see. So what is it more specifically? I know you spent a quarter of your life, you mentioned. You don't look that old, Volker.
Well, I'm not 100 years yet, so I hope I get there.
That's right.
But let's say more about half of my life so far. I dealt with Malaysian business people, Asian business people, and I kind of have a passion for the way things are done and things are dealt with in Asia. We are registered and have our headquarters in Kuala Lumpur, but we do regional business in ASEAN with China and with India, because obviously Malaysia is a relatively small but important and interesting market. So we are reaching out into the region.
So you facilitate trade among countries, specifically Asia and Germany.
Correct. I mean, it's not only about facilitating. We are not a broker. We also do a lot of operational business where we are setting up our own distribution channels, where we are taking stakes in production companies, where we are sourcing equipment and components which go into the international supply chain. And we are working with the vendors, with the manufacturers. So we have a variety of business models, which we decide on a case-to-case basis.
Right. Can you give us an idea about, how wide and how varied your German connection is? I remember meeting you in Berlin, and you introduced quite a number of, business people to our delegation late last year.
Correct. I mean, I'm now in the business since my early 20s. I'm 56 now. So I have a, say, 35 year of network, which I was building up. Originally, I was active in the machinery and engineering industry. I was working for a company which was selling large infrastructure projects, industrial plants, also in Malaysia. My company has a few reference projects for pulp and paper mills, for water treatment plants, power plants, things like that. So my original network is from the machinery and industrial world, so to say. After that, I went into the international management consulting industry with a company called Roland Berger. And there we were consulting companies from, let's say, all the international strong industries, whether it's machinery and engineering, whether it's automotive, whether it's software and IT and telecom, media. So we are working really across the board. And if I look at my reference list of the last 20 years, there's hardly any industry which we haven't touched. So,
Right.
and our value add is not so much that we really understand each and every single screw of a machine or the process of a chemical plant. Our value add comes where we are understanding the Asian culture, the Asian way of thinking and acting in the business. And there we are trying to moderate that with our international investors from Europe, who have a more, let's say, a European way of looking at things. And let's say the cultural element and the way things are done in Asia is either not known or neglected or doesn't play the role which it's supposed to play. So here we are also coming in as a little interpreter, so to say, not only language-wise.
Right. So you sort of smooth the edges in building this bridge between Germany, and you did mention Asia, not just specifically Malaysia. So we know the strengths of the German industries, heavy machineries, engineering, right, technology. But why did you choose Malaysia to be the gateway to Asia? What is so unique about Malaysia?
Well, I think Malaysia is a very special country in many, many aspects, and it was a little bit of a coincidence that I started in Malaysia, because when I was doing my first international sales trip for the company I used to work for, they just decided, okay, you go to Malaysia first, and then from there you start and discover the region. So I started in Malaysia, and I happened to meet some interesting people. We were successful in our businesses, so it came as a natural choice because I had an established network already. I did have that as a foundation, and then I thought, why reinvent the wheel and start, let's say, in Vietnam, for instance, or in the Philippines. Right. So it came as a natural choice. And when I started, I was fortunate enough that my partner was also having a job in Malaysia with the German embassy at that time. So we made a family decision, so to say.
But I think it was timing as well, because at that point, Malaysia was just coming out of agriculture and embracing some form of industrialization. Countries like Vietnam or even Indochina, has not come of age yet at that point, I suppose.
Well, if you look at the timing in particular, we have an interesting coincidence that I came to Malaysia, I think, 1 or 2 weeks just before the financial crisis hit in 1997. So, right. And one of our topics today, of course, is also crisis and crisis management in relation to Corona. So I do take a little bit of, not pride is the wrong way, but I have some experience how people behave and how they try to manage a crisis. When you look back in the history books, and you are a little bit younger than me, I think the 1997 financial crisis didn't hit you as much as a business person as the present one is hitting you now. So right. I still have, let's say, lively memories, how shopping centers stood empty, how construction sites were laying idle for years. And when we come to that story later, there's a lot I think we can learn if we look into the history books.
Right, really looking forward to that. 97, I was just a budding law lecturer, fresh out of university.
That's right.
Now that you mentioned the crisis, it's good that we are able to have a comparative analysis today. And 97, you've got a crisis. 2008,
internet bubble,
the subprime, financial crisis, and right now we have this COVID pandemic. Can you tell us, what are differences? It affects the economy, but I'm sure there are differences. Can you just tell us what is so distinct about the 97 financial crash as against the one that we're experiencing today?
Yeah. Well, I think our session should take about a week or so, to cover it all. But we can just scratch the tip of the iceberg. And I think one of the key differences is really that the 97 crisis and also the 2007 crisis, they were mainly financial crisis.
That's right.
We had currency depreciation with all the impacts following it. In 2007, we had the banks collapsing because they were playing with the money on the derivatives in the housing market.
Yeah.
And today we have a supply side shock, so to say, because by government order, companies are not allowed to produce. People are not allowed to move, to travel, other than the necessities. So it's really an external shock by government order, so to say. Everybody is sitting there in shock and awe and say, hey, what happened to us over the last 4 weeks? Nobody saw that coming. Nobody knows what is happening next. So it's really a very, very unique situation. And I think there is no, how do you say, there's no handbook for it. We are living from day to day, more or less.
Fighting an invisible enemy, right? In Malaysia, we had the speculators, we had, 2018, we had just affected because we were plugged to the world financial grid. But right now, everyone is affected by this virus. But the question is not just government action and stuff and things like that. The question is, how does it affect business? How is it different? Because we hear of threats of shops closing, people losing their jobs, and these are stories that frequently play out every 10 years, according to the cycles. But in your opinion, how is it going to be different this time, since it's not financial?
Well, I think it's really anybody's guess, and I'm a very positive person by nature. So I don't believe in this doomsday scenario, that we go back 500 years and we need to build everything from scratch. And we can see hopes and creativity and new businesses popping up left, right, and center. So I believe that there are a lot of also positive impacts with all the negativity and all the shocks and awes we are going to see. I mean, we see the e-commerce popping up. We see new medical solutions being invented out of urgency, but people are really trying to find ways of making the best out of it. And I think very often these days of my studies. I've studied international economics, and one of my favorite economists at that time was Joseph Schumpeter. I don't know whether you have heard the name. He was an Austrian economist, and he was also working on what he called a creative destruction concept, where he also says the economy is going into cycles. And whenever we are seeing saturation and people are getting lazy, then there are other newcomers coming up, destroying the business, and people who are creative, they build something new out of it. And in a way, I think this is very applicable to the present scenario. And I don't know so much whether this is discussed in Malaysia these days, but here in Germany, in the TV talk shows, in the newspapers, in the internet, you see a trend now, more and more people saying, well, actually, I think this is also a wake-up call for us to think what is really necessary. If you go back, let's say 3-4 months before the corona, everybody was talking about Greta Thunberg, in Germany at least. CO2.
Can you share, for the benefit of our Malaysian viewers who have not heard of that name?
Well, sure. I'm sure most of the Malaysian viewers also have heard about CO2 and global warming and all that. It's an important topic of it. But in Germany, we saw the icon of that movement being a young student from Sweden. Her name is Greta Thunberg, and she was traveling by train, by sailboat. She refused to take planes and cruise ships. So she went to the New York convention of the UN by sailing boat. And she is very much an icon of the young generation. She's calling for the Friday strikes. And I have a 14-year-old daughter, and we are having a dinner and breakfast and lunch discussion. And that was like 3-4 months ago, and everything was around that topic. Today, nobody talks about it. Of course, everything is full corona, corona, corona. By right, because this is the major impact. But what is happening is that people are saying, actually, the standstill of the economy, you have clean air suddenly. If you look at the pollution index, traffic is not so bad anymore. There are interesting discussions coming up, but of course, it always depends in what position you are. Yeah, if your family income is threatened, you are losing your job because your factory has to close down. You are not thinking about global warming. You're thinking about how do I fill my shopping cart for next week. And this is the urgency, the governments, whether it's federal or regional or local, this is what they have to deal with. Okay. And it's one of the most challenging jobs these days, how you make your people survive and how to give them some positive impetus, some psychological support and motivation. Why not resign and go back to the kampung and say, okay, I'm gonna become a farmer again. And before that, I was a guy working in mechatronic or computer science. All that is breaking away. This is not going to happen.
Right. So what you say, it's, this pandemic, it's like a reset button. It allows people to think, about the future and what they want to do and take action and transform themselves. You either transform or whatever it is, things cannot be business as usual. But just to get a sense of what's happening in Germany, are you in a lockdown right now? I assume you are. I have got German friends who told me that they are. And how long have you been in this, practicing this social distancing policy?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was in Malaysia for my birthday, which was on the 13th of March. And that was, I think, the day when the lockdown started. Or
that was the 18th. It happened about
18th.
Less than a week later.
So I was just able to travel back to Germany on the 15th of March, just before the lockdown started. And I thought I escaped the lockdown. But then I arrived in Germany and the lockdown started a week after Malaysia. So I think it's more or less the same. I feel it is not imposed as strictly as in Malaysia. I mean, for instance, we could still move around without having a permit, but it's more, it's not so much an order and a law, it's a request by the government. And they just appeal to the people to behave and do the right thing to do. And
so what's the percentage of, population?
Surprisingly, people do obey the recommendations, For instance, we don't have a law that you have to wear face mask yet. For instance, we were planning to visit my parents in Bavaria for Easter that we had to cancel. We could have probably done the holiday or the visit, but we said, okay, we don't want to put any unnecessary danger to my parents who are in their 80s. And the elderly generation is the most
at risk.
Scary age group, so to say. Yeah. We said, okay, let's do the right thing and stay home. And I mean, we are in a very privileged situation. We have our home office, we have the supermarket open, so we can't really complain.
But are businesses open or,
it
factories?
Depends. It depends. We have a similar regulation like in Malaysia, where the production which are of urgent needed products, they still run, provided they can follow the recommended rules, which is the social distancing, where you have to have 1.5 or 2 meter distance to your partner or your neighbor or your co-worker. But for instance, bars and restaurants are closed. You can only get takeaways. I mean, the complete tourism and travel industry is more or less at zero. So it's very severe. And the government in Germany, they have come up with a rescue package, so to say, of unimaginable amount. We are talking about 150 billion euros. Right. And they just did that in the parliament, I think in 2 or 3 days. So people were scratching their heads. Hey, we were always complaining, they can't renovate the toilets in school. They can't repair the bridges because they always say there's no money. And suddenly we find 150 billion euros. So that's the other side of the story. But of course, everybody initially is happy about the immediate response and the immediate support. And what really surprised me, I have to say, that so many companies said, okay, if we have to close for 2 or 4 weeks, we are going bankrupt. And that is something which I found really surprising, where you really say, okay, you can't really pay your fixed cost for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks if you have no income. And yes, that is true. If there is no revenue coming in, what do you do? As a business, you really have to lay off your workers. You are stopping to pay the rental if you don't own the factory or the building. And you are pushed into a corner, and you have to get into survival mode.
Right. So before we touch on the economic stimulus package, that's something very interesting, because we also had our economic stimulus package, and we had an enhanced version that came out about a week later. But coming back to German businesses and their resilience, we had, when the first economic stimulus package, the second one actually, the pre-Hatin they call it, which was about 250 billion ringgit, which was also huge, by Malaysian standards, unprecedented. But there were hue and cry, particularly from the small medium enterprise community. Well, we know small medium enterprises in Malaysia is very different, in its definition from Germany. Germany, it goes up to, to be a medium size, is up to 500 million euros. That's
revenue.
Over 2 billion.
Talking,
So ours is much smaller at 200 million. Okay. Now, that surprises me, because you say German businesses, companies do not have reserve to go beyond 2 to 4 weeks. We were talking about 2 months to 3 months. What do you think is the reason behind this? This is something unusual.
Well, I as a consultant, I never trust the statistics I read. Of course, this is also, honestly speaking, the lobbying groups, who are favoring or supporting these companies, and they start crying for help immediately. And we have a saying, who cries the loudest gets the most. And I see also that is a little bit also the reason. So I think if really comes it, how do you say it, test to shove, people will stay afloat longer than they now pretend to be.
So we are in week 5. Germany is probably in week 4. That has come to that threshold already. Have you seen massive unemployment and factories and businesses shutting down?
Yes, we do. Well, again, you have to differentiate sector by sector. For instance,
tell me, who are the winners and who are the losers in this game?
I mean, I really feel there are very few winners. Of course, you see all the stories about medical equipment. There is a big hoo-ha really in the market for masks and ventilators anywhere in the world. So all these companies who are producing this type of medical equipment, they have a winning year for sure. But that, I believe, is not really sustainable. We also see everything which is related to e-commerce and delivery services. That is also a boom. I just read recently, Amazon is looking for 75,000 new hirings.
That's right.
So just imagine. Also, if you look at the share price, Amazon is hardly down. Whereas
and Jeff Bezos just made like $25 billion.
30, 40, 50% down in the share price is the norm now. So there are very few winners, and I mean, as a consultant, I'm also thinking who are going to be the winners. And of course, the winners are those who are able to stay afloat longer. They be able to be buying over their competitor who is filing for liquidation. So there will be a lot of movements in all markets, in all segments. Look at the automotive industry. All the big car producers, they have closed their production for 4 weeks. In Germany, we have a very unique system which is stopping the unemployment rate going up dramatically quickly. And they call that Kurzarbeitergeld in German. And the abbreviation is that the companies promise to keep their workers on the payroll, but the government jumps in and pays about half the salary for a certain period of time. So therefore, the companies are not letting go their workers. They can still maintain their base salary. And everybody is hoping that things will go back to a normal situation in a couple of weeks from now. And that was helping Germany a lot in the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, which we have also managed reasonably well.
Okay, but has Germany learned from this? I mean, I could understand it, in the automotive industry, in production, for example, 98 and probably in 2008, that you may have to shut down due to a government fiat, requiring people to practice social distancing. But I've been to the BMW, I've been to the Porsche factory, and many of these factories have already adopted what is known as the industrial IR 4.0, Industry Revolution 4.0, and most of the things there are automated. So do you think they've emerged stronger because of this automation? You have robotics, vehicles, they are autonomous.
No, I agree. I mean, this is definitely, and the automotive industry is usually a front runner when it comes to new technological innovations in production, in manufacturing, in design and engineering. And if you put that into perspective to Corona, yes, of course, if you have a fully automated production, there are hardly people moving around. They are just in the control center. But still, you have to look at all the logistics, the products and the parts and components. They have to be delivered from China, from wherever. And if that supply chain is breaking down, then whether your production is automated or not, you don't have the parts to produce your end product. So it's a chain reaction, and nobody is really free from all these impacts which are happening all over the place.
Right. So so you see automotive we're going to come back to this supply chain, more importantly, the global supply chain, right? Which explains why you are here with Asia and all that. But before that, are there any other prominent losers aside from those involved in hospitality, food and beverage, and travel?
Yeah, well, I think I just read a very interesting figure yesterday. Lufthansa, for instance, the German national carrier, I think same as any carrier in the world, they are losing €1 million per hour.
Wow.
And so that's a staggering number, and I wish I could have 1 hour of that revenue, so to say. And it is very, very likely that governments have to bail out these companies.
Right.
And as the governments have learned also that they are not only giving them another loan or another credit, and they will most likely take over the shares and become the owner of such airlines, for example. I think we will have the same scenario in many, many other countries.
But that's not going to bode well, because we know governments don't run, airlines.
That was exactly my question. And I'm sure the German government couldn't run an airline in any other better or worse way than Malaysian government.
Yeah, because this is not a question of bad management. This is a question of a crisis that is unforeseeable. It's an extraneous, vitiating circumstance that people couldn't.
I agree. Yeah, and I mean, especially the airline industry is taking huge hits. And there will be a restructuring of a very new dimension with consolidation and less planes in the market. And then, for instance, coming back to Malaysia. Sorry if I don't want to interrupt you, but one of the big industry targets where Malaysia was investing heavily was to build up the aerospace cluster for Malaysia. And of course, I mean, all these strategies, you have to double check and triple check now whether this is really the right strategy to go after when the crisis is over. Because for sure, Airbus and Boeing, they are not going to build as many planes as they planned about a year ago. Right. And that, of course, has an impact on all the sub-suppliers, let's say for airline seats, for hoses, for braking system, whatever, There are so many tier 2, tier 3 companies.
There could be canceled orders as well, canceled orders, and these future orders stretch, to years ahead, even a decade. So these are the far-reaching implications. But you did mention about bailout money. Will that bailout money come from that stimulus package that was announced?
Yes, partly so. I think there will always be new case-by-case decisions about what they would probably call critical industries or systemic companies, like they did where they did rescue the banks. For instance, in Germany, the second largest bank is called Commerzbank. They were also being bailed out and government took majority of the company. They are still around 10, 12 years later. The share price is probably about 10% now of what it used to be. Talk about government competency to run and manage a company. I'm not a big fan of bailouts, I have to say. I'm rather with Schumpeter, where we have to say, okay, we are going to take a hit. Let companies die a natural death if they are not able to survive. That is the mantra of all the liberal economists, and
Right.
of course you are also a social and a person where you think, well, we can't let all these people go unemployed. We have to create new opportunities for them.
So
we
how
have
has
to
the
go
stimulus package been? Yeah, sorry. How has the stimulus package been? You mentioned 150 billion euros. Much of that money goes towards which sector? For example, in Malaysia, when they announced the first package end of February, it was just targeted at the tourism and hospitality sector predominantly, and putting money towards healthcare and things like that. And then when it hit us in a big way, and they went directly for a socialist approach. They tried to protect the B40 and the M40, the working people. And then a week later, they said, okay, we hear you, the small, medium enterprises, being employers of 2/3 of the working population. This is your package. The larger companies and the mid-tier are still there, and they say, okay, you guys hang on there. But it's an ongoing process. So we begin to see a sort of a pattern that the Malaysian government has applied. What is the scenario there in Germany? What's your experience like over there?
I think it is more or less similar to what you have just described. I mean, the immediate idea was to help the very small companies, restaurants with 5 or 10 people, small software companies, little workshops where people are not going there, hairdressers, they are all suffering, and they gave immediate stimulus, I think, of 10,000 euro, which was basically an unleveraged loan or credit from the bank. And usually the banks are being blamed. If you are a business person, you know how difficult it is to get a credit from your bank. And in this case, the government said to the bank, we as a government stand behind that credit. So if there is a failure to pay back the loan, the government pays to the bank. So the banks were just, let's say, a facilitator of that money being sent out. So you had to make an online application. And after 3 days, I have met some friends who confirmed to me, after 3 days, 9,000 euro were in my account.
Wow.
No question asked. You just have to be a legitimate entry in the online form. And of course, people say, and I'm sure it will happen in Malaysia as well as in Germany, there will be some people who are cheating. They say, I wanted to close my company anyway, but I rather take the money and run.
Malaysia, we don't have cheating. We just have applications not being processed. There were reports that you have like 90% failure rate, and there's so many SMEs, and to date, less than 3,000 had been approved, and that process is slow. And they say by the time the money reaches them, they'll be dead on their tracks already. These are the doomsayers. We have our fair share of them as well, but it's enlightening and positive to hear that at least the banks are doling out the rescue.
That's right. That's what they do.
Fast enough. Right. So you did touch about on this global chain, the global supply chain, and I suppose that forms a big part of your work as well. Connecting the different parts together. How is that affected by COVID right now? Because we are talking now not about just a national disaster, we are talking about global disaster. You find China on the road to recovery, although there were imported cases. Malaysia is in a partial lockdown, very much like Germany. Some countries have not adopted it yet. So you see a fairly checkered policy across the world. So how do you see the new normal being in terms of trade moving forward, in the next couple of months? And when are we going to get this recovery? And can things ever go back to normal? And if not, what will the new normal be?
Well, that is a very complex question, and
yeah.
Of course, if I would know all the answers for sure, I wouldn't be sitting here. I would be on my sailing yacht in Bermudas, But let me make some educated guesses. Let's put it this way. And if you look at China as a big elephant in the room in terms of being one of the major components of the international supply chain, with all their massive companies being the supplier to iPhone, to the car companies, to the machinery and engineering industries. Before the corona, we had a trend and a discussion where people were saying, maybe you shouldn't put all your eggs into the China basket, also set up some of your production parts in Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, because China is getting too costly. We had the trade conflict with the US. So people were advised at that time to differentiate their supply sources. Now China is the first one to be able to say, look, we have no more corona. You can continue with your original supply chain partners. And I'm sure there are many board members of the companies thinking along the same way. So in a way, it feels at this point in time that China may be the winner out of this, and people are refocusing on developing partnerships with China in an even more sophisticated and in a deeper way. The opposite of that is where people are saying, look at the issue, the discussion about the ventilators. Now everybody says, well, it cannot be that a country like Germany or even Malaysia, that we are depending on, let's say, a handful of ventilator manufacturers in China. And when we have the crisis hitting the van, prices are doubling and tripling overnight. So everybody is now saying we have to de-globalize, and certain parts and components which are crucial and which have a very, very high and unique importance for a crisis situation like we have it now, we have to have the resources to build these units at home. In a way, Trump talking America first, do on your own. So we have these two trends, on the one hand, where we see globalization. I feel you cannot turn it back. There is nobody to call. On the other hand, you have a political push where people and also the majority of the voters possibly say, well, we never want to be depending again on any other country. We are a big, strong country ourselves. And even in Germany, we have shortages of simple products like face masks. So we are having discussion, why is Germany not able to produce 1 billion face masks and put them in stock? But of course, if you are coming out of the castle, you're always smarter, and nobody predicted or saw that coming. So now they are saying car companies should produce ventilators. From an economic point of view, that is crazy, car companies should produce cars, And so there are a lot of interruptions, there are a lot of discrepancies, there are a lot of irrational and not logical arguments being exchanged. And I understand that because people simply don't know. So they are coming up with creative ideas, they throw that onto the table, and people are haggling around it, and everybody's trying to find the right solution.
Correct, and you just got to. I believe in a war, factories were converted to make, weapons and bombs.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
And what you say,
there's no easy answer to that one, and I think again we have to believe that people are being smart, that people are being creative, that they are coming up with new solutions, solving problems. This is what drives any economy. You have to identify a problem and solve it.
Yes.
And then you are a successful business.
The road to recovery, do you think it will be long and arduous, or do you think we would, just spring back to life at one point soon? In other words,
well, as I said earlier, I mean, I'm an optimist by nature, and I wish, like everybody, wants it to be a V-shaped recovery. And I saw yesterday was a very important day here because there was a press conference by our Chancellor, Angela Merkel, and she has extended the lockdown for another 2 weeks, but some partial openings or partial reliefs are happening. And she gave a very interesting statistic, and I'm not a doctor or medical specialist, but what is logical to me is that they have to work on a system where there is a minimal danger that the corona epidemic will come back after you release the lockdown. And that is what would be most critical. If you are releasing the lockdown now, everything looks back to normal, and then suddenly you have a new outbreak. Then you have to go into an extended, massive lockdown for a few months. And that would be even more catastrophic than it is already now.
So the people Germany, made the decision to extend, right?
So they're very careful here in Germany to say, hey, hooray, everything is over, back to normal. That's not happening. And I think from all what I know and read, that's the right thing to do, because what I read is one very critical number. This is what everybody has to watch. This is the infection rate. How many people one person who has the coronavirus can infect others? And the effect of social distancing was that that factor came down from one person could infect 10 or 20. Now, as a result of the social distancing behavior, that ratio came down to 1:1. So at this point in time in Germany, one infected person can statistically infect others. Of course, if that person is mingling with hundreds of people, that is not the statistics. But I mean, hypothetically, statistically, one infects one. That is manageable, and that could be pushed down further.
Very, very positive.
Yeah. So they are now trying to bring that down even further. In China, in Wuhan, that ratio came down to 1 to 0.3. Yeah. And that was when China says, yes, we have won the war against Corona, so to say. So if you look at this number, we are still very far away from that. And that is another, I mean, we are jumping topics a little bit. That is also something which I find uniquely interesting, how we are looking at China and the way China and other Asian countries have managed the corona crisis compared to the way Germany and Western countries are managing it. And I think if I look at the success rate, we have to give all credits and hats off to China, Korea, how they handled that. And that is another discussion, I think, which will fill the history books afterwards.
Thank you. But whatever said and done, at least you see a flattening of the curve in Germany.
That's correct.
Definitely a direction in the right way, and the extension is well worth it. And we wish you the best. But before we end, Volker, do you have any advice for your Malaysian friends and fellow Malaysians here, viewers?
Well, I only have 2 words to say, and this is Malaysia Boleh.
Malaysia Boleh, we like that. That's super positive, and you really are a Malaysian at heart, Volker. So with that,
thank you very much. So hello to everybody who is listening in, and I'm happy to receive all your questions if you have any. And I really like to compliment to you, Bruce, for this program. I think very interesting, sharing ideas, and I think that is one way how you can also manage the crisis, interact. You have all the ways in social media, Zoom, Skype, Facebook, whatever it is, WhatsApp. Stay in touch, don't hide in your living room, and get out to the world, spread the good news, not the bad news. And I'm very sure we will get back together on a personal level soon.
Thank you. Those are wise words from Mr. Volker Friedrich, all the way from Germany, but a Malaysian at heart. Thank you so much. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any more questions, just put them in your comments and we will get back to you. And with that, I would like to thank you for coming in and have a productive week ahead. Stay safe and keep safe. Thank you.